Hello, and welcome to Call to the Workforce, a podcast designed to support the professional and leader development of LDS and Christian women. I'm your host, Emily Chipman, and today we are talking to Jessica Johnson about how to develop other people, and you are in for such a treat. I met Jessica about 10 years ago, and she's wonderful. She attended BYU, Brigham Young University, for both her undergrad and master's degrees, obtaining a bachelor's in broadcast communications and later an MBA in marketing. During that time, she also served as the president of the MBA Student Association. Professionally, she has worked as a live television sports producer for college football and basketball. And at one time, she managed internal operations of 1,000 offshore employees for a management consulting firm. For the last decade and a half ago, she's acted as consultant and most recently the managing director of leadership development for one of the top HR and leadership consulting firms in the world. She has coached women in leadership roles in the United States and many other countries, including Canada, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, and Mauritius. At church, she has served in roles including ministering sister, gospel doctrine teacher, and currently she is a Stake Relief Society president. She is a very involved aunt and sister. She has a love of cycling and is clearly a busy woman. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Emily. It's a delight to be here with you. I love it.
Oh, I was thinking about this morning and I thought, oh my gosh, you're so warm and kind and you're this great listener. You have such great experience. And I really think at the end of the podcast, people are going to be like, Jessica Johnson is my best friend now. So
Well, that's all kind of you to say, Emily. And I'm so thankful that you're doing this podcast. I think it is just terrific and it's going to be really helpful.
I think it's going to be a really great resource for women. And I've been thinking about this. So you shared with me that you recently did a 7-week discussion series for women from multiple church congregations about leadership.
Yes.
And we're just going to jump right in because you have so many great things to share. So one of the topics that you shared with me when we were prepping that you're really excited about right now is developing other people and also that there is a component of our faith that can help us. And I love that you said when we met that what we do for others, we should also do for ourselves. And it really got me thinking about the experience I've had both with my friends when we do in January, oftentimes I'll get my girlfriends together and we eat a bunch of food, of course, and then talk about our goals. And they always come away with so many goals that they can focus on, everything from health to finance to career to relationships. And then I think about the women I coach in a professional setting. And again, so many times they're excited to have a coach and it feels like, oh my gosh, well, I've got a coach. I've got to work on everything. But it makes me think about, we don't have time for everything in our life. So where do we start? What makes a good goal? I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you're thinking about that, Emily. And I completely agree with you when it comes to goal setting. I mean, it's right around the first of the year and lots of people are going through, their annual personal goal setting. And as they do that, um, you're right. We just try and pack too many things in at once. We only have so much willpower that we can divide in certain ways. And so when we're trying to divide that too much into, working on our health goals, as well as our finance goals, as well as our business goals, and so on and so forth, it's going to make it very difficult to accomplish any of them to the level that we want. And so
Right.
when I think about goal setting, I first start with the outside in. Now, that term comes from the RBL group, which is the company I've been working for the last,
Mhm.
decade plus. And when we talk about outside in, what we want to think about is how the things that we do as we try to develop our own leadership, as we try to help and support others, it's all about how we can do things for other individuals. When we're thinking about our Savior Jesus Christ and how he consistently looked for others, how to develop them, grow them, help them be able to carry on his church when he was gone. Um, that's what he has been all about. And so we can be about that too. And when we think about the outside first versus just internally, here's how I'm feeling, here's where I want to grow and develop, we've got to think about our stakeholders. When I think about my stakeholders, I think about my clients at work. I think about my family members. I think about my friends. I think about those that I serve in my church congregation. All of those are my stakeholders. And when I think about them, it actually gives me some clarity on how to set up a goal and do that a little bit better.
Yeah. So can you give us some examples of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with HR teams a lot. And when they're thinking about their goals, sometimes they will set it just because they've looked at best practices that are happening around the world. And they say, oh, that's something that we absolutely need within our organization. And I will say, well, tell me how that connects to the strategy of your organization. It can't just be a good thing, but how does it connect? We like to use the term so that I'm going to work on this thing so that I can achieve, this strategic direction or goal in the long term. And so if we personally are thinking about our own growth and development, but not really how it may impact those stakeholders, and the so that, why am I working on this thing at all? And if a HR department can't give me a so that, I said, why are you spending any time on that at all? I want you to kind of look to the future and look outside of kind of your box and see how you could grow and develop
Yeah.
in ways that would benefit others.
About what you're saying, and I'm thinking about um, on a more nuanced level, but I think related. When I have people say, I want to work on trust, because trust is a big thing, but I think, trust in the military looks very different than trust in a creative environment. I use this example a lot because trust in the military is very exact and it's very clear. And on the other hand, if you say you want to build trust at maybe Apple or in an art department, people might be like, no, no, please give me my free reign to be creative because that's what trust looks like there. And I do think when I've worked with clients, there's so many times that they'll say, oh, I was reading this book or I was reading or listening to a podcast and it said I needed to do this. Or all successful people always get up at 5 a.m. and then they do this, and then they do this, and they do it for this exact amount of time. And sometimes I think, but is that what you need? And is that in alignment with the direction that you are headed? So I love that there's this connection of like, not just thinking about what other people need, but also thinking about, does it even make sense for where we're going?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And if you're thinking about kind of those goals, and if you're trying to help other people set goals, whether those are your children or your coworkers within an organization, maybe it's your direct reports. As you think about that, within organizations, very often we will set performance goals, right? That's what we do at the beginning of the year. We check them mid-year. We make sure we're meeting them end of year. And that's how people's bonuses are, sometimes organized around whether we are hitting or missing those goals. And the performance goals are important. That tells us we're getting results within our organization. But if you really want to grow and develop someone and help them feel like they are developing, you have to have a development goal connected to a performance goal. In
Okay, can you talk more
organizations,
about that and
yeah,
just really clearly lay out how do you distinguish between a performance goal versus a development goal?
for sure. So when we think about performance goals, this is how are you going to work hard and get things done in the organization? Generally, they're framed so that the focus is on an outcome. So a specific performance goal affects things that I'm going to do as an employee, where I'm going to focus, what actions I'm going to take, and trying to do things that are relevant in the organization. But when we do those performance goals, it's not actually helping an individual grow and develop, it's helping them accomplish a task.
Mm.
Sometimes that task will stretch them, sometimes it won't. And so those performance goals, that's usually what we put into, our performance evaluation systems. And then there are development goals, which are how do you grow and get smarter, or you're building a skill set in the thing that you're doing. So, how do you increase your knowledge? You add skills, you acquire them. Um, your learning and development has changed through the process. These type of development goals are effective because they prompt an employee to generate new solutions to, maybe if we're running into a brick wall or we're at some impasse, they figure out how to implement things. They kind of, charge their brain up and use it a little bit differently. Um, they help individuals really feel like they aren't the same person at year end. And so a performance goal doesn't necessarily do that. And so if you want people to stay motivated in your organization, they need to have development goals. But we have to do performance goals to be able to get results. And so how do you connect those two together? How do you marry them together? So one suggestion I have for individuals at that goal setting time is when we're trying to create some stretch goals for individuals in your organization, or I've even done this in a church, leadership position, is I say, okay, if this is our goal for the next year, maybe it's a team goal, maybe it's an individual goal. How do you need to grow to be able to achieve that goal?
Oh, I
And
love
maybe
that.
there's some training that they need to go to, or maybe it's a mentor that they need, people that they should, interact with, a conference maybe they should attend, something like that that can help them grow so that they can accomplish the performance goal.
Oh, I love that. And so, because to me, this is where development really becomes exciting.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I would have for you is, what's the difference between a development goal that stretches versus being a little too audacious? And I sometimes when I talk with people, I think, oh, would I love to? It's so easy for us to dream big, and everyone says dream and stretch and grow. And so, how do you pick something that's a stretch but not too much and maybe even discouraging?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So there's a Journal of Organizational Dynamics, and it had a study from Germany. And the study looked at adults who perceived their work goals as difficult, right? So there was some stretch involved. And when they had that stretch, they reported increases in their positive emotions, in job satisfaction, feelings of occupational success. And that wasn't just in the moment, it was over a 3-year period that they did this study. Additionally, those individuals that were stretched a bit had no signs of exhaustion. And so it's important to have a goal that pushes you a little bit. I don't just want something that's going to check the box, but I want to be able to be stretched in that. But like you're saying, some people will call them the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals. And you can go overboard, especially as a leader in setting those goals. We have plenty of cautionary tales from organizations who have set those, they're really unachievable goals, just trying to get people to stretch and get a little bit higher. Lucent, Enron, Wells Fargo set these audacious goals that were truly unattainable, and they caused employees to lie or to make bad decisions. And now there are, there are organizations that don't exist any longer, or Wells Fargo that even 5, 6, 7 years later are still trying to sweep up broken glass from those goals that were set too high to achieve.
Yeah. What I love about this is you've got some indicators there. Do you feel like you have to lie? Are you really tired? And now I want to throw another wrench into our conversation, and it's this. So you've set a goal that stretches. You're not exhausted, but you're energized. Good job. You don't feel like you have to lie. That's great. And I also recognize that if we over focus on an area, it can also hold us back professionally. So, as an example, I could focus a ton on communication, but then do I start getting rusty in negotiation skills or delegation? So, given we can't do everything at once, but we also need to develop in multiple areas, how do we create a broad experience to develop? And I think you call this having a mosaic experience.
Yeah. So, if you think about a mosaic, maybe you've seen one in, I'm thinking of like a church in Italy that's just full of mosaics. That's what line the walls. But every mosaic is made up of these small pieces of tile, and they're different colors and they've got variation in them. But when they come together, they create this beautiful picture. And so when I think about a mosaic of a career or a mosaic of, personal development, there are so many different options out there that we can kind of pick up a tile piece here and a tile piece there and fit them into our own mosaic. It's almost like creating your puzzle that's going to put things together. Emily, I don't know if your family does puzzles, but mine does not usually, but we did one over Christmas. And some of it can be frustrating when we're trying to figure out the right piece to go into kind of that mosaic that we're creating. But
Yeah.
when we recognize how we need to develop and how we can help other people develop, I think as a leader, a trap that we fall into is when an individual just wants to talk about their next promotion. And it's a complete trap because you don't know when an opportunity is going to open up for that individual. Now, if you can have a conversation about their mosaic, about what sort of experience they want to gather in the future, and what's going to round out sort of their skill set, then we can have a better conversation about, as your leader, how can I be an opportunity creator for you and
Mhm.
help you look for those mosaic pieces when you tell me how you want to grow and develop. So I
Yeah.
think about one individual that I worked with. This was for an energy company up in Canada. And they were, they were getting into senior levels of leadership, but they recognized they had never had what they call a close to the pipe experience. So this energy company had a lot of pipelines, and it is a different experience to work on a pipeline versus working in a headquarters office. And so
Mhm.
they recognized they hadn't had this experience. They talked to their, senior leader and said, hey, I'd really like to pick up that tile piece for my mosaic because I think it'll round out my experience better. And they could have taken a job that was two steps below where they were at that moment. But because they had the conversation with the leader said, you know what we could do for you is we can work out a secondment. Why don't I put you there for 6 months? We will keep a job open for you. You can come back to that in the future and you can get that experience. And then I want you to teach everybody else what you learned. And so
Mm.
they picked up that puzzle piece or that, mosaic tile. They were able to place it in there and grow and develop themselves in the process.
So how do you know which tile to pick up? Because my family, we're puzzle people. Um, I'm thinking about the times that I've picked up a puzzle piece and then I kind of look at it and you play with it and then you're like, no, I don't actually think that's the puzzle piece that I want to play with right now because it's just
Yes.
so hard. So how do you know which puzzle piece to pick up? Because there, like we said a few minutes ago, there are so many options and so many things you can work on, but we want it to go in a good trajectory.
Yeah. Well, I think leaders can do a great job of talking with their employees because sometimes the employee doesn't know what they don't know. So, how do we talk together and recognize like what are things that excite you in your work from day to day? What do you look at and say, "Oh, I wish I could try that. I wish I had an opportunity for that." I was working with a senior woman just this past year. I was her coach, and she was in a leadership development program. And she was like second in command in this large tech organization in the legal department. So general counsel was her boss.
Okay.
And she had worked for a law firm for many, many years, loved the law firm life, and had lots of different clients, but it was a very individual sort of life, right? You work with your clients, but she wasn't working with a large team internally. She didn't manage anyone. And she started thinking about, through like questions from her boss, how do you want to grow and develop? She said, I'd actually really like the opportunity to grow and develop other lawyers. but I just don't have that here at the firm as much as I'd like to. And so she started looking at options, and she looked at her clients, and she looked at, I mean, she had a lot of clients, and she said, who do I love working with? What organization do I love the culture in? And she had already tried out that culture because of the work that she had done with them. And so they came to her at one point and said, hey, we've got an opening in our legal department. It would mean you would, kind of manage this team of people. You're going to bring up some of the junior lawyers and get them, ready in-house to be able to support us better. And because she had already done this thinking about how she wanted to contribute, it seemed like a great opportunity for her. So she came in-house to that tech company and has loved it and is terrific. When, there's some toxic people in the organization, she is a safe harbor for many there. But had she not done the thinking on her own beforehand, like, what do I want to do? How do I want to continue to contribute or contribute in a different way? It would have been difficult to, see that opportunity and jump into it.
Yeah, there's two things that stand out to me about what you're saying, and I think it's important whether, for anybody who's listening, whether you are a leader or you are who's leading other people and listening from that perspective, or whether you're listening from the perspective of, I want to be developed. One of the things that stands out to me is that working with your manager and talking about your vision or your path can be really helpful because they know things that you don't. But the other thing that stands out to me is you kind of got to have a vision or some idea of where you want to go.
Yeah, I would say, in addition to your leader, you've probably heard the phrase your personal board of directors, but just having a group of mentors that you will talk to and kind of bounce some ideas off of can be quite valuable as you try and round out your own mosaic and create that picture.
I love that we're having really a rich conversation about a career that has variation and richness, which to me, just in hearing this, makes me feel excited. Like I can't, I, you know, I would imagine a lot of people would say, oh my gosh, if I had this career that had variation and I was developing in ways that I knew were meaningful. And I think back to when I worked internally, some of the times that I think I was most engaged and happiest were those times where I had bosses who would sit down with me and say, where do you want to go and what can you do? And as an executive coach, one of the things that I always tell people is that they are responsible for their own development. And so that really makes me think about one-on-one meetings with our bosses. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you share with people about how to have those one-on-one meetings, either with their teams or if it's you wanting to develop with your manager? What are the principles or stories you could share? And what would you say?
Well, the comment you were making on trust and making sure that there is trust first, I think that's crucial in having these valuable conversations between supervisor and direct report. So you got to start with a basis of trust. And then part of that trust is continuing to hold these one-on-one conversations regularly. Now, as a leader, and when I work with leaders, we recognize that different individuals need different things from their supervisor. And so you might have one employee that needs a one-on-one on a weekly basis. They need to check in with you. There's somebody else that you could check in with once a month and they will do just fine. And so not spreading the peanut butter evenly for everybody, but it's adjusting to the needs of the different individuals. And so whatever regular means for the employees that you're working with, make them regular. Don't cancel your one-on-ones. I know it's an easy one to just, take off of your list. Change up the setting. So I know that, many times we're doing things over Zoom or Teams or different technology. You might, say, hey, I'd love to meet at least once a month face to face, if that's even an option. Maybe we could go for a walk, even if we're both on our phones, and have the conversation while we're moving, but change up the setting from time to time. I like to keep track of those one-on-ones and the things that we discuss. So when you get to the end of the year, you can say, oh, look, this is the progress that's been made by this individual. And then I think this is crucial, but if I am the supervisor, my employee is the one who owns the agenda for the one-on-one. I want them to come up with it. It's a great way to help them grow and develop and to think clearly about what are the important things that they need to discuss with me as the supervisor. And so,
Yeah. And I would love to ask you about this because
yeah.
the agenda,
Mhm.
as I think about it, and I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, that there's a difference between performance goals and development goals. And at least for me, I feel like those are two very different agendas. Can you speak to your perspective on that?
Yeah, well, if we have coupled them together previously, then we can continue talking about them together, right? And so in a meeting, I should expect that my direct report in a one-on-one will want to report out on a regular basis about how they're doing on those performance goals, as well as how they're developing themselves. We could also focus on career conversations and how they want to develop themselves. And as a leader, I can just be very curious and ask them some questions about that. I can also look for opportunities to give them Liz Darger, who she's just finishing her PhD, but she's done research on, she calls it the nudge. But as a leader, when you see someone else who has, demonstrated a skill set to a high level, or you think they have a propensity to be able to grow in a certain area, being able to kind of give them a little push and give them a little nudge and help them recognize what they can do. Uh, that can be a great way to grow and develop someone. I think about the nudges that I've experienced in my career. At one point, I was working for a large consulting firm on the East Coast. I had been traveling every week. I traveled every week for a year and a half. And finally, they had this leadership development training, and I got nominated to go to it. And it was a week-long course. And so, again, I was traveling, but it was different. It wasn't just my usual work. And there was a gentleman in there. He was kind of the like overseeing it. And we were working in teams on a case study. And he would come around and watch us. And he pulled me aside at the end of the training and said, Jessica, I've been watching you. I think you have a calm demeanor. I think you have the ability to kind of work in this specific area of our organization. And I know a senior VP who needs some help right now. What would you be interested in making a move? Well, these are things like in my mosaic, I was thinking, wow, I would really like some international experience. I would also really like to not travel every week, and they'd just been in my mind, but I hadn't done anything about it. And then this opportunity is presented to me from Pete Sari, who just observed me and gave me that little nudge to say, I know this isn't work you've done before with those offshore centers and international development, but I think you've got the mentality to be able to do that. It was so important for me to kind of get that nudge, to feel the confidence to step into that next role.
And I think those nudges don't even have to be that big all the time.
Yeah.
Like that's a huge nudge, but maybe as leaders or even as peers, we have an opportunity sometimes to say, hey, I've noticed you're really good at this. I have an opportunity here where you could help on this, or there's something that you could do along these ways. So I love that concept that we can have this small giving forward. And I also love what you were saying earlier about these one-on-ones where we do need to be sharing these things. So, you were mentioning, oh, well, I had this in the back of my mind, but I hadn't really said something. And I remember going to a Women in Tech meeting 2 or 3 years ago. And there was a gentleman there who's a venture capitalist. He has a venture capitalist firm. And he said that one of the most important things that he tells women is you need to tell people where you want to go. You need to tell people what you want. He shared that he'd had someone come up to him and say, hey, I really want to do this. He hadn't known it before. But because he knew it, all of a sudden he could see opportunities. So I think this idea of being open with people, whether it's your manager in one-to-ones where you say, I want to report back. This was my goal. These are the things that are going well. Here's where I need help. You could do the same thing with your performance, or this is how it's impacting performance, or these are the wins. Being really open and actually telling people, I want this, becomes really important for us professionally. So I kind of want to shift for a moment and talk about an area that's kind of opposite of that, because these are really clear scenarios, right? Like you report to someone or someone reports to you. And so you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I mentioned up front that you've held several leadership roles. Leadership in a volunteer capacity is really different. So how do we incorporate this into a volunteer type capacity? Because we're not doing performance reviews, we're not hiring people. How do we do this?
Oh, yeah. Emily, I think there are so many parallels of just the things that we've talked about today that I have utilized and want to utilize even more. Like you had said, I serve as a Stake Relief Society president. And just yesterday, I was meeting with a brand newly called Relief Society president in one
And
of
let
the
me just
wards
pause you here for a
within
moment.
my stake.
For anybody who's listening, I have a lot of friends who aren't members of our faith. So we have congregations, and then in a region, you have like a group of like 8 or 9. You put into, it's like a region, and we call it a stake. So Jessica is in our faith. We have what's called the Relief Society, and it's like one of the largest women's organizations. And we have teaching people who teach. You have people who are responsible for serving. And then you have a president who's oversees all of it in a congregation. And then in a stake, so kind of the region, you have a president who oversees all the other presidents. So it's a leader of leaders, and there's a lot of volunteers. So Jessica's in that role. So I just wanted to give that context for people who are listening and might not be as familiar with it.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm having this conversation with one of the individuals that I guess you could say reports to me. And she's brand new. These are volunteer positions. And I asked her questions about, so what's the skill set that you bring to this opportunity? How are you going to utilize your skill set to bless the lives of others? And really kind of getting in that one-on-one conversation, getting them to own what things they do well. As women, I don't think we do that very well. We don't say, yeah, I am good at this. And she said, I am good at loving people and ministering to them and helping them feel, connected within our faith community. She said, but I am not great at administrative things. And so she has a presidency, a couple of counselors and a secretary that work with her. And she made sure somebody in that group is really good at the administrative side of things, because she knows that's not her skill set, but she also knows it needs to be done. And so having one-on-one conversations like that can be helpful. I also have my own presidency with a couple of counselors and a couple of secretaries. And I make a point of a couple times a year meeting with them one-on-one, because I want to talk about how they're feeling. It's a volunteer capacity. Are you feeling burnt out? Do we need to change something? I also ask them about what gifts and talents they have that they're not using right now, and what gifts and talents do they want to grow and develop in. And we've had some great conversations. And when I know that information, then I can be that opportunity creator for them and help them find ways to grow or to utilize those skills for the benefit of others. So always thinking outside in.
Yeah, I love this because there's lots of ways that people volunteer, but certainly, I think our faith is really interesting so a few years ago, one of the leaders, President Elson, invited us to develop a leadership voice as women. He wants to hear more from women. And so as I think about this, and what you're saying is you're giving women this opportunity to develop, it's consistent with what we've all been invited to. Do you have any principles you could share, having done this, that might be helpful for people who are either wanting to develop or have the opportunity to help other people develop?
So you are familiar with Marshall Goldsmith, as you're a certified
Mhm.
coach and coach of coaches in that space. One thing that Marshall Goldsmith has talked about is the concept of feed forward versus feedback. And I think, especially when it's a volunteer capacity, we are afraid to give feedback to people. And we don't even know how to do that. And so I try and think about what is the intent. If I feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to have a conversation and give some feedback to this individual, what is my intent? Correct intent would be I want them to grow and develop and to be able to do this better in the future.
Yeah.
And so, if that's my intent, then that's a wonderful reason to give them some feed forward so that they can continue getting better.
Yeah.
Now,
And let's tell people and kind of clarify what feed forward is, because it might be a new term for people. Feed forward is the concept that instead of saying, so feedback is, here's what you did wrong. Feed forward is, here's how you can be more successful in the future.
absolutely. And so, if I've got that mindset on as a leader, even if it's among volunteers, I can think about there are lots of ways for these individuals to develop in their lives. Volunteer opportunities is one of them. I am sure they want to keep getting better because most people do. And so, how do I go? Like, if Emily, I'm working with you and I think of something that I could maybe share with Emily that might make her more impactful and be able to grow herself, I'd say, Emily, I was just thinking about an interchange that we had last week. And I would love to offer you some suggestions around that if you're open to that, just for if that opportunity comes up in the future. And asking permission, getting into the conversation, and sharing some of the facts, of the situation that I saw, and then my suggestions for the future. And all along, it really helps if I can get Emily, right, to talk about that too, where she can say, oh, yeah, I was intending to do this, but I guess it didn't come off quite right. Or,
White
yeah,
land.
I did not stick that landing. So, yeah, those things can be challenging.
I love that because it's that phrase, even that line could be used in a volunteer capacity, maybe, but even at home or at work to say, I've been thinking about something. I have some thoughts for you. Are you open to this? And you've from the perspective of I saw some things that might actually make this easier for you. A lot of people would love to hear that. I think people crave hearing this, and I will say, you pronounced this in a very relaxed fashion. It was something that, as there was some prep work between uh, between the two of us. One of the things I noticed is that you had mentioned relax. We're all volunteers. Can you speak to that? Because I think there's also some space for that in our professional setting as well. Um, so speak to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think sometimes one of the dangers in leading people is to assume that everyone has to do everything the way you do it. And so you're just trying to make little clones of yourself. And that does not engage people. And so if you can step back and say, and be really clear about what we want to accomplish, what's that, goal that we're trying to get to, but recognize that individuals can find 10 different ways to get to the goal, then fine. Like in a volunteer capacity, I am so happy if somebody else says, oh, I think I've got an answer for that. Let me step up and do that. And yep, it may not be the way I was going to do it. And I need to just let go of the way I was going to do it, unless there is something crucial here that I can have a teaching moment in. But most of the time, if they are using kind of their excitement and commitment for, moving the work forward itself, I want to celebrate that and I want to get behind it. And I want us all to just relax a little bit and be grateful for the work that others are doing
Yeah.
and being willing to step into.
I love this because I'm thinking about the amount of stress that would decrease for everybody, whether it's in a work setting or any setting where someone is like, oh, you want to take that on? go for it, right? Sometimes we take that over ownership and it actually, our over ownership increases our stress and it takes away from people the development opportunity that could
Yeah.
actually be really amazing for them, which is funny because I think people are like, oh my gosh, if I let people do their idea, it's going to be so stressful. What if it doesn't land? And I think, hey, you can still pop in every now and again and provide some guidance, give them some bumpers, like the bowling bumpers that help them stay online. It might look a little crazy, but it's going to get across the finish line. And if you think about that analogy of just saying like, we'll put some general bumpers in there and that bowling ball is going to be all over the place, but we know it's going to get where it needs to go. And you only had to put in the bumpers as compared to you putting in all the effort and controlling everything. So, oh my gosh, Jessica, this has been so great. The time flies so fast.
Emily, can I share one quote that I just think goes
Yes.
along with that so well? I think one of the reasons why we want to keep our hands really tightly wound around things is because we are afraid of failure. And University President Kevin J. Worthen, so he was the president of BYU, a faith-based institution. His very first address to the entire university community, he said, "Failing is an essential part of the mortal phase of our quest for perfection. We don't often think of it that way, but it's only because we tend to focus too much on the word perfection and not as much on the word quest. Failure is an inevitable part of the quest. How we respond when we fail will ultimately determine how well we succeed." And so being willing to let other people fail in that process is what is crucial. And sometimes we've got to just loosen up and let go. And if failure happens, they're probably going to learn a whole lot from it. And so are we.
Yeah. And I don't think we could, I think it's such a great way to think about this as we've come to kind of the end of our topics, where as you think about development, I love what you said, what's good for others is good for you, right? Like it's good for you to allow yourself to fail. I knew that you were going to have so many great nuggets. I'm so appreciative of your time here. I have loved, there's so many little nuggets that can be taken away. Everything from really getting clear on the difference between your performance versus your development goals, but then allowing that to create a mosaic. And as you have this picture that starts to develop, leveraging other people to help you, whether it's your managers who are giving you insights, or whether it's other people who actually want the opportunity and want to step in. I want to give you a chance to end the podcast or end your notes with a word of wisdom. As I've thought about the podcast and I've thought about what do we need, I think as women, we always need a point of encouragement. So, Jessica, I would love to hear from you. If you had one or two sentences of encouragement that you would leave, kind of your mic drop moment that you want to give to women, what would that be?
No pressure. Oh, we've been talking about nudges, Emily, and what I want to say is we need to be mindful of the nudges that we're receiving from the Lord, from heaven, that come to us in little packets here and there. And I think when we are aware of those things and mindful of those things, we can be confident that we are on the Lord's errand, that we're doing the things that He expects us to do in this life. And that can focus on how we, contribute to our community, our family members, our work situation, among our friends. And those little nudges, I think, are there for us if we will be mindful of them and try and hear them and discern them. And I love it because I feel them on a regular basis. I felt them today and know that there are things that I can continue doing and growing and developing. It's a lifelong process and it's exciting. I don't want to stay stagnant. And I hope we can all continue to do that.
I love that. And we can. I always think of these nudges as, those moments where you're in the car and you suddenly realize I need to slow down and it stops an accident. Or you think, I should really reach out to this person and you do it's just at that right moment. And so I think for all of us to think about that, is there a nudge we've heard today that we can take action on? Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We're going to be releasing these close to weekly. If you have found this helpful, would you please share it with other leaders, with other women that you believe that this would help? And with that, we will see you next time.